My name is John, and for the past 12 years, I've been married to Laura. We met in our 20s, during a charity event at the local community center. Laura was there with her friends, and I was volunteering. Her laugh was infectious, and her passion for art and creativity drew me in. We connected instantly, and it wasn't long before we started dating. Laura pursued her dream of becoming an artist, taking classes and joining local art studios. I supported her every step of the way. I worked in IT, and while my job was stable and somewhat boring, I found fulfillment in supporting Laura's artistic journey. Our life was harmonious, filled with love, shared dreams, and the occasional ups and downs that come with any marriage. Over the years, Laura had developed a routine. She spent a lot of time at an art studio nearby, honing her skills and participating in various workshops. She often spoke about her instructors and fellow artists, but there was one name that started cropping up more frequently: Mark. Mark was an art teacher at the studio, known for his exceptional talent and somewhat eccentric personality. Laura admired him, often discussing his techniques and the projects they were working on together. At first, I thought nothing of it. Laura had always been passionate about her work, and it made sense for her to talk about those who inspired her. But over time, I began to notice subtle changes. She started coming home later than usual, always with an excuse about a project that ran long or an impromptu group discussion that she couldn't miss. She became more guarded with her phone, which was unusual because we'd never had secrets before. The nagging feeling in my gut grew stronger, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself that I was being paranoid. One evening, while Laura was at the studio, I decided to tidy up around the house. As I was picking up her sketchbooks and supplies, a piece of paper fell out from one of her notebooks. It was a sketch of a woman, naked and vulnerable. The detail was exquisite, capturing every curve and shadow with stunning accuracy. The woman in the sketch was Laura. My heart pounded as I stared at the drawing. Who had drawn this, and why hadn't Laura mentioned it? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. I tried to convince myself that it was just a study, something she had done for practice. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. The following week, I decided to surprise Laura by picking her up from the studio. I left work early, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. As I approached the studio, I could see the lights were still on. I entered quietly, hoping to catch a glimpse of Laura in her element. What I found shattered my world. I walked through the rows of easels and canvases, searching for Laura. When I reached her usual spot, I found another painting that made my blood run cold. It was another nude portrait of Laura, this time more detailed and intimate. It was unmistakable that someone had spent a lot of time observing her, capturing her in ways that felt deeply personal. I heard voices coming from a nearby room, soft, intimate whispers. My stomach churned as I followed the sound, my footsteps feeling heavy and slow. I reached the door, which was slightly ajar, and peered inside. There they were, Laura and Mark, completely oblivious to my presence. They were wrapped in each other's arms, lost in a passionate kiss that left no room for doubt about the nature of their relationship. I couldn't bear to watch any longer. I turned and left, my heart pounding and my mind reeling. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and utterly broken. How long had this been going on? How had I missed the signs? My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. In the days that followed, I was a wreck. The image of Laura and Mark together haunted me, playing on a loop in my mind. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. Laura tried to act as if everything was normal, but I could see the guilt in her eyes. She knew something was off, but she didn't push me, perhaps afraid of what she might uncover. My emotions were a storm, anger, rage, despair, all swirling together. How could she do this to me? To us? Our life, our marriage, everything we had built together felt like a lie. The betrayal cut deep, and I needed answers. I needed to know how long this had been going on, and why. Most of all, I needed to confront her, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed proof, something she couldn't deny. One night, after Laura had gone to bed, I took her phone and went through her messages. She had always been careful, deleting any incriminating texts, but I wasn't looking for messages. I knew there were other ways to find evidence. I checked her photo gallery, her emails, anything that might give me a clue. And then I found it. An email from Mark, sent just a week ago, with the subject line, "For your eyes only." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a long, heartfelt letter from Mark. He talked about their time together, how much he admired her, how he couldn't wait to be with her again. He mentioned their secret meetings at the studio, the stolen moments of passion, the plans they had for the future. Each word was a dagger, cutting deeper and deeper. I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop reading. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. The next day, I decided to follow Laura. She said she was going to the studio for an evening class, but I wasn't sure I believed her. I waited until she left, then grabbed my car keys and followed at a distance. My heart raced as I tailed her through the city streets, every turn amplifying my anxiety. She did go to the studio, but instead of parking out front, she drove around to the back. I parked a few blocks away and walked back to the studio, keeping to the shadows. As I approached, I saw Laura and Mark standing by the back door, talking in hushed tones. They looked around to make sure no one was watching before slipping inside together. I felt a surge of anger and despair, a mix so intense it left me breathless. I wanted to storm in, to confront them, to scream and shout and demand answers, but I knew that wouldn't get me the closure I needed. I needed to see for myself, to gather the evidence, to understand the full extent of what had happened. I waited outside for what felt like an eternity. The minutes stretched on, each one filled with the torment of imagining what they were doing inside. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I approached the studio door and found it slightly ajar. I slipped inside, my footsteps silent on the concrete floor. The sounds guided me, soft whispers, the rustling of clothing, muffled laughter. I followed them to a small room at the back of the studio. The door was closed, but through the thin walls, I could hear everything. Their conversation was filled with the kind of intimacy that only comes from deep, emotional connection. I couldn't listen any longer. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. They were caught off guard, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. Laura scrambled to cover herself, her eyes wide with fear. Mark stood there, speechless, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. The sight of them together, so comfortable and familiar, was the final blow. It confirmed everything I had feared. "You thought you could keep this from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. "How long has this been going on?" Laura's eyes filled with tears. "John, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Never meant for this to happen?" I repeated, incredulous. "You think that excuses it? You think that makes it better?" Mark tried to speak, but I cut him off. "You don't get to say anything," I snapped. "You don't get to justify this. You don't get to explain." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. The anger and despair were overwhelming, a tidal wave of emotion that threatened to drown me. "I trusted you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I believed in you." "How could you do this to me?" Laura sobbed, but I couldn't find it in me to feel any sympathy. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. I turned and left, slamming the door behind me. As I walked away, the sound of her crying echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of everything I had lost. The drive home was a blur. I felt numb, the shock of what I had witnessed still settling in. I knew I needed to confront Laura again, to get the answers I deserved. But first, I needed to process what had happened, to find a way to deal with the anger and rage that threatened to consume me. The anger inside me grew with each passing day. I couldn't escape it, couldn't suppress it. It was a burning rage, an inferno that threatened to consume everything in its path. Laura's betrayal had shattered my world, and I needed to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. And Mark, that smug, self-righteous bastard, I needed him to suffer too. I spent days plotting my revenge. I needed to be smart about it, to ensure they both paid the price for their deceit. First, I gathered all the evidence I had, the emails, the photos, the recordings of their intimate conversations. I compiled everything into a neat, damning package that would leave no room for denial. My first target was Mark. I knew exposing him would be the ultimate blow. His position at the studio was precarious, and his reputation as an artist would be in ruins. I created an anonymous email account and sent the evidence to the studio's board of directors, the local art community, and a few influential critics. I wanted everyone to know what kind of man Mark really was. The fallout was immediate. Within days, Mark was suspended from the studio. The whispers and rumors spread like wildfire, and his students started to withdraw from his classes. His career was crumbling, and I relished in every moment of it. Watching him lose everything gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. It was a small victory, but it was a start. Next, I turned my attention to Laura. She was more complicated. We had a life together, a history that couldn't be erased. But I needed to make her understand the depth of my betrayal and the consequences of her actions. I decided to confront her one last time, to lay everything out and watch her squirm under the weight of her guilt. I waited until she came home from the studio, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She tried to speak, but I held up my hand to silence her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I just want you to see what you've done." I threw the evidence on the table, watching as her eyes widened in horror. She flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. "John, please, You what?" I snapped. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" "You didn't want to hurt me? Save it, Laura. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences." Her tears flowed freely, but I felt no pity. The pain she had caused me was too great. I wanted her to suffer, to feel the same agony that had consumed me since the day I found out. "I've already sent copies of this to everyone we know," I continued, my voice steady and controlled. "Our friends, your family, everyone. They all know what kind of person you are now." Laura collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Why are you doing this?" she cried. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "There's no fixing this, Laura. You destroyed us the moment you decided to betray me. There's no going back." I stood there, watching her fall apart, feeling a twisted sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. She had caused me so much pain, and now she was feeling it too. It wasn't enough to heal the wounds, but it was a start. The next day, I filed for divorce. Laura didn't fight it. She knew it was over. We divided our assets, and I moved out, leaving her to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a place where I could start fresh, away from the memories of our life together. But my revenge wasn't complete. I still needed to confront Mark one last time. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized the extent of his downfall. I waited outside his apartment one evening, hidden in the shadows. When he finally emerged, I stepped forward, blocking his path. "John," he stammered, taking a step back. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see the man who ruined my life," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "How does it feel, Mark? How does it feel to know you've lost everything?" He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I never meant for this to happen." "You think sorry is enough?" I snarled, grabbing him by the collar. "You think that makes up for the pain you caused?" He struggled, but I held him firm, my rage giving me strength. "You took everything from me," I continued, my voice low and dangerous. "And now you're going to pay." With a final shove, I released him, watching as he stumbled back, his face pale and terrified. "Stay away from me," I warned. "Stay away from Laura. If I see you again, I won't be so forgiving." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. The anger and rage were still there, but they were tempered by the knowledge that I had taken control. Laura and Mark had paid for their betrayal, and now I could begin to rebuild my life. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The days and weeks following my confrontation with Laura and Mark were a whirlwind of emotions. I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The anger that had fueled my actions began to dissipate, leaving behind a void that I didn't know how to fill. I needed something to help me move forward, something to help me heal. One weekend, while sorting through some old boxes in my new apartment, I stumbled upon a set of woodworking tools that had belonged to my grandfather. He had been a skilled carpenter, and I had fond memories of watching him work in his shop when I was a kid. The smell of sawdust and the sound of the saw cutting through wood had always been comforting to me. I decided to try my hand at woodworking, hoping it would provide a distraction and maybe even some solace. I started small, with simple projects. I found an old workbench at a garage sale and set up a makeshift workshop in my garage. My first project was a birdhouse. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it felt good to create something with my hands. The process of measuring, cutting, and assembling the pieces required focus and precision, and it helped take my mind off the pain and betrayal. As the weeks went by, I found myself spending more and more time in my workshop. Woodworking became a form of therapy, a way to channel my emotions into something productive. I moved on to more complex projects: a coffee table, a bookshelf, a set of chairs. Each piece I completed gave me a sense of accomplishment and pride that I hadn't felt in a long time. One day, while working on a new project, I heard a knock on my garage door. It was my neighbor Jim, an older man who lived down the street. He had seen me working in my garage and was curious about what I was making. I invited him in, and we struck up a conversation. Jim had been a woodworker himself and offered to help me with some of the more challenging aspects of my projects. Jim became a mentor and a friend. He taught me new techniques, shared stories from his own experiences, and encouraged me to keep pushing myself. Our conversations often extended beyond woodworking, touching on life, love, and the challenges we both faced. Jim had lost his wife a few years ago, and he understood the pain of losing someone you loved. His guidance and support helped me more than he knew. As the months went by, I continued to improve my skills. My garage transformed into a fully equipped woodworking shop filled with tools, lumber, and completed projects. I started to take on commissions from friends and neighbors, creating custom pieces for their homes. Each new project was a challenge, but it also provided a sense of purpose and fulfillment. One day I decided to tackle a more ambitious project: a dining table. It was a gift for Laura's sister Emily, who had always been supportive throughout the ordeal. She had stood by me when everything fell apart and had become a close friend. Emily loved hosting family dinners, and I wanted to create something special for her. The dining table was a labor of love. I spent weeks designing, cutting, sanding, and assembling the pieces. As I worked, I reflected on how far I'd come since discovering Laura's betrayal. The anger and despair that had consumed me were slowly being replaced by a sense of peace and acceptance. I had found a way to heal, to rebuild my life, and to find joy in something new. When I finished the table, I invited Emily over to see it. Her eyes lit up with joy and gratitude when she saw it. "John, this is beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Thank you so much. This means the world to me." Seeing her happiness filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It reminded me that there was still good in the world, still reasons to keep moving forward. The journey had been painful, but it had also led me to discover a new passion and to forge new connections. As I stood in my workshop, looking at the completed table, I felt a sense of closure. The scars from Laura's betrayal would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I had found a way to heal, to create, and to find joy in the process. Woodworking had given me a new beginning, a fresh start, and a path forward. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, but I felt ready to face them. With my tools in hand and the support of my new friends, I felt hopeful for the future. It was time to start living again, to embrace the possibilities, and to build a life filled with purpose and happiness.